This is my son. My husband's voice cut through the quiet church. I was standing beside my father's coffin when he said it. The boy holding his hand was about 6 years old, dark-haired, wide-eyed, the same age as our marriage. Gasps spread across the chapel. Family, friends, my father's old business partners, every one of them turned to look at me. I didn't want to embarrass you, my husband added calmly, looking straight at me, but the real family I love deserves to be seen. A woman stepped through the church doors behind him, confident. She walked straight to his side as though she belonged there. The boy squeezed her hand. My chest tightened. "What are you doing?" I whispered. He ignored me. He turned to the guests instead. "For years," he said loudly, "I've lived a lie. My marriage has been hollow, and I refuse to keep hiding the family I truly love." Gasps swept the room again. My father's coffin sat only 3 feet away. My husband had chosen this sacred grieving moment to destroy me. Near the entrance, I noticed 2 men in dark jackets standing quietly on either side of the doors. Strangers. I didn't recognize either of them, but the thought dissolved before it could form. Heat burned behind my eyes. From the back row, a chair scraped against the stone floor. Someone stood up. The moment I saw who it was, my heart stopped. I didn't know yet that this moment would unravel everything my husband thought he had planned. If you enjoy stories where betrayal meets justice, consider subscribing. Because what happened next in that church shocked every single person in the room. The silence in the church grew thick as fog. My husband hadn't noticed him yet, but I had. The sight of him made my breath catch somewhere between my chest and my throat. It had been 8 years since I last saw him. 8 years since everything changed. Yet I would have recognized him anywhere. The straight posture, the steady gaze, the stillness of someone thinking rather than reacting. He stood tall in the back row, dressed in a dark suit, expression calm but cold. The man I once planned to marry. My former fiancé. I had always wondered why he disappeared so completely after we ended things. He never called. Never sent a single word. My father had said only that he believed it was best to let me move forward without reminders. I accepted that and never pushed further. Now, watching him walk toward the front of the chapel, I wondered what else my father had never told me. Meanwhile, my husband continued his performance. "I didn't want to make a scene," he said, shaking his head. "But I believe honesty matters, especially today." Today. The day we were burying my father. Anger rose in my chest. My father had built one of the largest construction companies in the region. His reputation had meant everything to him. And now my husband was turning his funeral into public gossip. The woman beside my husband smiled faintly, resting her hand on his arm as though she had already won. Whispers spread through the pews. A secret child? Did she know? How awful. My hands trembled at my sides. My former fiancé moved steadily down the aisle. My husband finally noticed him and frowned. "Excuse me," he said sharply. The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Bringing a child to a funeral to announce an affair," he said calmly. "That is a bold strategy." The guests shifted. The tension pressed against the skin like heat. My husband straightened. "This doesn't concern you." The man didn't move. He glanced toward me, just for a second, and in that brief look I felt something strange. Not pity, not surprise, something steadier, like he already understood exactly what was happening and had arrived fully prepared. My husband followed his gaze and laughed. "Now I remember you. You're the one she was engaged to before me, before she made her choice." He smirked. "Still showing up after all these years?" The man ignored the insult. He looked at the boy standing beside the woman, then back at my husband. "How long were you planning this?" My husband scoffed. "Planning what? This performance." Whispers rippled through the guests. My husband's jaw tightened. "This is my personal life." "Not today," the man replied. He nodded toward the coffin. "Today belongs to her father." The room fell completely silent. For the first time since walking in, my husband looked genuinely unsettled. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and turned to address the room. "Let's finish the truth then. This child is my son." He raised his chin toward the guests, and very soon he will be part of the family that inherits everything her father built. My husband stepped closer to the coffin as if he belonged there. "This company needs strong leadership," he continued, addressing the crowd directly. My father's old partners watched carefully. They were powerful men who had built empires alongside my father for decades, and my husband was speaking to them as though he had already earned their trust. "My wife is grieving," he said smoothly. "Understandably, but running Whitmore Holdings requires stability and clear focus." My stomach twisted. This was not humiliation alone. This was a play for power. "I've already been handling most operations behind the scenes for years," he added. A lie. A clean, confident lie delivered to a room that couldn't immediately disprove it. "My family is my future," he said, resting his hand on the boy's shoulder. "And I intend to build something lasting, with or without interference." My hands clenched. The man near the front row had been watching quietly. "Strange," he said. My husband frowned. "What is?" "That you chose today specifically," my husband smirked. "I chose today deliberately." "Why?" the man asked. My husband's eyes moved toward me. "Because today the will gets read." The room stirred. The real reason. My father had specifically requested his will be read immediately following the service, so that business succession could begin without delay. My husband had known this for weeks and decided that announcing his intentions publicly beforehand would give him leverage before anyone could challenge it. "Since I'm still her husband," he continued, "it only makes sense that I help guide the company moving forward." My chest burned. My husband turned slowly. "And why not?" he asked. The man stepped forward into the aisle. I recognized that calm expression. It meant he already held the answer and was waiting for exactly the right moment to deliver it. "You seem very confident about influencing the inheritance," he said. My husband laughed. "I don't need confidence. I have legal standing. We're married." The man nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, you are." Then he reached inside his jacket. The room grew very still. He pulled out a sealed envelope. My husband's eyes narrowed immediately. "What is that?" "A letter." "From whom?" He looked toward the coffin. "From her father." The room froze. My breath caught in my chest. My husband scoffed. "That's ridiculous. Completely impossible." But the man walked toward my father's longtime attorney, an older man seated quietly in the front row, and placed the envelope carefully in his hands. The lawyer looked completely unsurprised. "I've been expecting this," he said quietly. My husband frowned. "What do you mean?" "Mr. Whitmore notified me separately that this letter would be hand-delivered today." The lawyer explained. "He wanted someone independent to carry it, to ensure it arrived without interference." He broke the seal and began reading. Within seconds, his expression changed entirely. "What does it say?" someone whispered. The lawyer looked up slowly. His eyes moved from me to my husband. "This letter was written 3 months before Mr. Whitmore passed away," he said. My husband's confidence flickered. "And?" The lawyer swallowed and steadied the page in his hands. "What?" my husband repeated. The word sounded thinner now. The lawyer cleared his throat and continued reading. "Mr. Whitmore wrote that if any individual attempts to gain control of the company through manipulation of family ties, that individual is to be permanently removed from all executive authority." A murmur spread through the church. My husband forced a laugh. "I'm her husband. I have legal rights." "Yes," the lawyer replied calmly. "But according to company bylaws, Mr. Matt Whitmore updated 3 months ago. Marriage alone does not grant executive authority over Whitmore Holdings." My husband's jaw tightened. Why wasn't I informed of these changes? They were made privately and attached to the will. They become binding only at the reading. You knew the will was being read today. You did not know what it contained. My husband had known about the reading. He had not known what was inside it. His entire plan had been built on a dangerous assumption. The woman beside him looked uneasy. The boy stared quietly at the floor. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. My father had known. He had seen this coming long before I had. The man in the aisle spoke calmly. He suspected something well before anyone else did. My husband glared. "You stay out of this." The man simply looked toward the lawyer. "Please continue." "There is more," the lawyer said. "If the individual attempting to gain control is the spouse of the inheritor, that spouse is to be removed from all company accounts immediately." My husband's face went pale. "That's impossible." My husband's voice rose. "This letter means nothing." My father's lawyer shook his head firmly. "It means everything." He held up the document. "This letter is legally attached to Mr. Whitmore's will and was filed with the courts 4 weeks ago. It is already on record. Whispers swept the chapel. My husband looked around quickly. The expressions had changed. Partners who had greeted him warmly for years now looked cautious and cold. The woman gripped his arm. "You said everything was secure." He pointed at the man in the aisle. "You planned this." "I didn't plan anything," the man said. "You just happened to show up carrying a letter?" "Your father first contacted me 2 years ago," he said quietly. "The same week he discovered your husband had been moving money out of the company. He kept watching, building evidence, saying nothing. 3 months before he passed, when he knew time was running short, he reached out to me again. 6 weeks before he died, he handed me this letter and asked me to keep it safe until today." The church fell completely still. My husband laughed harshly. "That's impossible. You haven't been part of this family in years." "No," the man said steadily. "But I was someone your father-in-law trusted completely." My chest tightened. The worried look in my father's eyes whenever my husband's name came up, I had dismissed it as stress. Had he already known even then? My husband shook his head. "You're bluffing." The man glanced toward the lawyer. "Am I?" The lawyer's voice echoed through the church. "This document confirms the appointment of a temporary guardian of corporate oversight for Whitmore Holdings." My husband frowned. "What does that mean exactly?" "If any internal conflict arises following Mr. Whitmore's passing, particularly any spousal claim against the company, the appointed guardian is authorized to protect all company assets until the rightful heir assumes full executive control." My husband scoffed. "And who exactly is this guardian?" The lawyer lowered the document. Then he looked directly at the man standing in the aisle. "You are." The room erupted in whispers. My husband stared. "No, that is absolutely not possible. Mr. Whitmore signed and notarized this document personally 9 weeks before his passing. It was filed with the same court that holds the will." My husband shook his head slowly. "This is insane." The woman beside him looked frightened. "What does this mean for us?" she whispered. My husband didn't answer. One of my father's oldest partners rose to his feet, then another, then a third. 3 men who had built Whitmore Holdings alongside my father for 40 years. They walked quietly to the front of the chapel. The first spoke. "If these documents are properly filed, Mr. Whitmore's wishes will be honored. Fully." My husband looked stunned. "You can't be serious." The second nodded. "Your conduct today raises serious concerns about your judgment." The third crossed his arms. "You chose a funeral to make this announcement." The man in the aisle stepped forward. "We should probably talk about the child," he said. The moment he said it, the entire room went silent. My husband stiffened. "The child?" he repeated. The boy stood quietly beside the woman, holding her hand. He looked confused and small, overwhelmed by tension pressing in from every direction. He was 6 years old and had been brought into something he had no part in creating. The man in the aisle nodded calmly. "Yes, the child you have introduced as your biological son and a future heir to this estate." My husband's expression didn't change. He kept his face completely still, not surprised, not defensive, just controlled, as if the subject carried no real risk. That stillness unsettled me far more than anger would have. "He is my son," my husband said flatly. "Interesting," the man replied. My husband's eyes narrowed. "What exactly does that mean?" Instead of answering, the man turned toward the lawyer. "Would you open the third document Mr. Whitmore left in your care?" The lawyer nodded. "There is another sealed file. Mr. Whitmore's instructions were to open it only if the child was introduced as a claim against the family estate." He paused. "That condition has now been satisfied." My husband looked furious. "This is absolutely ridiculous." But the lawyer was already opening his briefcase. Paper rustled. Tension grew heavier with every passing second. The woman beside my husband shifted nervously. "What is this?" she whispered. My husband ignored her. He kept his eyes fixed on the man in the aisle, his expression completely unreadable. "You think you're so clever," he said coldly. The man looked at the lawyer and said quietly, "Please." "What questions?" my husband snapped. The lawyer studied the documents carefully before speaking. "According to this file, Mr. Whitmore commissioned a private investigation 9 months ago, shortly after he first suspected a child was being positioned as a future claim against the estate." My heart skipped. 9 months ago. My husband laughed. "Complete nonsense." The investigation covered financial activity and the claim that you had fathered a child outside your marriage. Whispers rippled through the chapel. My husband raised both hands. I already admitted that today. It changes nothing. Yes, the lawyer said carefully. But Mr. Whitmore wanted legal verification before that child could ever be used as leverage against his daughter or his company. What kind of verification? DNA analysis, obtained through a court-authorized process after a licensed investigator presented evidence of potential estate fraud to a family court judge. The authorization was granted 6 months ago. The results were sealed, to be opened only upon a formal claim involving the child and the estate. The woman's grip tightened on the boy's shoulder. That's not possible, she said quickly. Her voice wavered. My husband said nothing. He simply waited, and that silence said everything. He already knew what the results would say. He had brought this child here as a calculated prop, fully aware the biology would never hold up. The lawyer looked directly at him, then slowly lowered the page. The report indicates the child is not biologically related to you. The room erupted, gasps, shock, overlapping voices. The woman stepped back sharply. That report is wrong. But my husband said nothing at all. The entire church erupted in whispers, but that DNA result was only the first truth my father had prepared for that day. If you want to hear how my husband's plan completely fell apart piece by piece, subscribe and stay with me. Because the worst part for him was still coming. My husband's face turned red. That report was fabricated, he snapped. The lawyer shook his head. The laboratory is court certified. The authorization is on file. Every step of the process is fully documented and legally defensible. It proves nothing, my husband said. But the words carried no weight. The woman beside him had gone pale. You told me everything was handled, she whispered. My husband turned on her. Be quiet. The boy looked up at both of them, confused and frightened. My heart twisted. None of this was his fault. He was a child used by adults who should have known better. The truth had already spread through every corner of the chapel. My father's business partners murmured quietly. One finally spoke. So the child isn't yours? My husband didn't answer. He turned to glare at the man who had started everything unraveling. You think any of this helps her? He said bitterly. The man's expression remained unchanged. This isn't about helping anyone. Then what is it about? He looked toward the coffin. Truth. My husband scoffed. You don't care about truth. I care about what her father asked me to do. My chest tightened. My father had trusted this man. After 8 years of silence, after everything that had passed between us, my father had reached across that distance and placed his complete trust in him. The woman grabbed her purse. I'm leaving, she muttered. Before she could move, the lawyer spoke again. There is one more issue. Everyone turned back toward him. My husband looked exhausted. What now? The lawyer lifted another page from the file. My husband's eyes narrowed. My finances? He repeated. Yes. The lawyer held up another document. Over the past 18 months, several large transfers were made from Whitmore Holdings accounts into a series of shell corporations. My father's partners stiffened immediately. Shell corporations? One said sharply. Yes, registered under multiple names across 3 different states. The investigation carefully traced the full ownership structure of each entity. My husband's voice rose. Tracing a corporate structure proves nothing. Further forensic analysis linked all of those corporations to a single controlling individual. The church became completely still. My husband forced a short laugh. And who is that supposed to be? The lawyer lowered the page. You. The whispering exploded across the chapel. My husband shook his head. No, that is wrong. One of the business partners stepped forward. How much money are we talking about? The lawyer flipped through the documents. Across 18 months. Several $million. Gasps rippled through the room. The woman beside my husband looked stunned. You told me you were already wealthy, she said weakly. My husband glared at her. Not now. The man near the aisle spoke quietly. Actually, now is exactly the time. My husband turned toward him with barely controlled fury. You've been digging through my private life. The man didn't deny it. Yes. Why? Because her father asked me to. The room fell very still. My father had known. He had seen this danger long before it became visible to me, and had quietly set something irreversible in motion to stop it entirely. The silence in the chapel pressed down heavily. My husband stood in the aisle, surrounded by whispers that had completely stopped being about me. One of my father's oldest partners stepped closer to the lawyer. "Are you saying company funds were misappropriated?" he asked directly. The lawyer chose his words carefully. "The investigation indicates that funds were redirected without proper authorization or board knowledge." My husband shook his head. "This is a misunderstanding. There are explanations." But his voice had lost its authority entirely. The woman beside him looked pale. "You told me we were about to inherit everything," she said quietly. He snapped at her. "Be quiet." The man near the aisle remained calm and patient, like someone watching a result unfold exactly as expected. My husband turned toward him bitterly. "You've been spying on me." "No," the man replied. "I was protecting something." "And what were you protecting?" The man's eyes shifted toward me. "Heh." My chest tightened. 8 years ago I had ended our engagement to build a different life. And now here he was, standing inside my father's church, protecting everything my father had built, and everything I had almost lost. My husband scoffed. "She never asked for your protection." I spoke before I could stop myself. "Maybe not," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. "But my father did." The room turned toward me. My husband looked startled. It was the first time I had spoken directly since he had walked through those doors. "And clearly," I continued quietly, "he had very good reason to." My husband rubbed his temples. "This is insane," he muttered. The guests watched him with a closeness that had shifted from curiosity into something harder. The power in the room had changed completely. Earlier he had stood in this aisle convinced he held every card. Now the floor beneath him was shaking. The woman stepped back slightly. "You didn't tell me about any investigation," she whispered. My husband glared. "I didn't know about it." The man in the aisle spoke again. "That was intentional," my husband snapped. "You had no right." "I had every right," the man replied calmly. "Her father gave me that authority when he asked me to protect his daughter and his company if something went wrong." My throat tightened. My husband laughed bitterly. "So you've been waiting for me to fail?" "No," the man said. "I was watching to see if you would." That answer landed differently than an accusation would have. Several guests exchanged quiet looks. Many in this room had carried doubts about my husband for years, small things that never added up, questions never quite answered. My father's closest partner spoke firmly. "If these financial transfers verified, we need a full audit." My husband's head snapped toward him. "You can't authorize that without a board vote." The partner met his gaze evenly. "The board convenes tomorrow morning." The lawyer nodded. "Company bylaws allow emergency review when credible evidence of unauthorized transactions is presented. That threshold has been met clearly today." He closed the folder and set it on the pew beside him. The boy tugged gently at the woman's sleeve. "Are we going home?" he asked softly. The innocent question drifted through the silent church like something small and lost. For a moment, the hard edges in the room softened. The child was frightened and tired. He didn't understand any of what was happening around him, and he never should have been brought here at all. None of this was his fault. The woman crouched beside him. "Soon," she whispered. But her voice sounded hollow. My husband straightened and faced the room. "This entire thing is a coordinated setup," he said loudly. "You've orchestrated this to destroy me." The man in the aisle raised an eyebrow. "You walked into a funeral and tried to take everything from her. That's completely different." "How?" My husband hesitated, because suddenly the answer wasn't obvious anymore. The man gestured toward the coffin. "Her father built a company worth hundreds of millions. He spent 40 years protecting it." He paused, and he spent the last months of his life making sure the wrong person could never take it from his daughter. The room understood immediately. My husband's face darkened. "You think I'm the wrong person?" The man didn't hesitate. "Yes." One word. It landed harder than any speech could have. My husband's hands clenched. "You've always resented me." "No," the man replied calmly. "I never trusted you. That is an entirely different thing." A ripple of quiet agreement passed through the guests. Small nods, exchanged glances, the subtle language of a room that had already reached its verdict. The lawyer stepped forward again. "There's one final detail in the investigation file," he said. My husband closed his eyes briefly. "What now?" It concerns the timing of the financial transfers. My husband crossed his arms. There are explanations for all of it. The transfers didn't simply occur across 18 months, the lawyer continued. They accelerated sharply during the final 3 months of Mr. Whitmore's illness, and increased dramatically during the last 6 weeks when he was no longer able to monitor operations directly. A low murmur spread through the chapel. My stomach turned. 6 weeks. That was when my father had grown too weak to come to the office. When he had trusted the larger decisions to the people he believed were loyal. To my husband, the man beside the aisle spoke quietly. He noticed the transfers anyway. My husband glared. You can't know that. He showed me the records himself, the man said. 3 months before he passed, the same week he reached out to me again, he walked me through every transaction. He had been watching for weeks before we even spoke. My chest tightened. My father. Too tired to sit upright properly, quietly reading financial records in private, putting the pieces together alone because he didn't want to frighten me before he was certain. One of the partners spoke firmly. Your behavior today has told us everything we need to know. Another nodded. You attempted to claim influence before the will was even opened. The woman stepped farther back. Her earlier confidence had evaporated completely. My husband wiped sweat from his forehead. This is unbelievable, he muttered. But the tension in the church kept rising. One of the partners turned to the lawyer. When will the full will be read? Immediately following the service, the lawyer replied. That was Mr. Whitmore's specific written request, so that business succession could begin without unnecessary delay. The man in the aisle spoke quietly. That will settle the remaining questions. My husband looked furious. You're enjoying this? No, the man said. I'm finishing something her father started. The woman finally stepped away from my husband's side completely. You promised we would walk in here and everything would fall into place, she said. Her voice carried none of the confidence it had held an hour ago. My husband snapped at her. Stop talking. She no longer looked like someone who had won anything. She looked like someone who had trusted the wrong person, and was only now fully understanding the cost. The boy shifted nervously against her. Mom, he whispered. She pulled him closer, her eyes fixed on the floor. My husband surveyed the chapel. Some guests shook their heads openly. The man in the aisle spoke again. You should have simply waited. My husband glared. For what? For the reading. If you had attended quietly, you wouldn't have triggered a single clause. Every protection built into that will requires one thing, a public act of manipulation. You provided it voluntarily. My husband frowned. What does that change now? Everything, the man replied, because the will contains a provision you knew absolutely nothing about. The room fell silent. The lawyer shifted the papers in his hands. Technically, he said, the will is meant to be read in a private setting. One of the partners spoke firmly. I think today's events have permanently changed that. My husband shook his head. You have no authority to do this here. The lawyer hesitated. Then he looked directly toward me. This decision belongs to you, he said. Every pair of eyes in the church turned my way. My heart beat steadily. Just minutes ago, I had been standing silently beside my father's coffin, absorbing every word of my husband's performance. Now the entire room was waiting for me. I thought of my father, of 40 years of hard decisions made quietly in the dark, of the letter he had placed into trusted hands, of the invisible work he had done in his final weeks to make sure I would not face this alone. I took a slow breath. Read it, I said. The lawyer nodded and opened the thick sealed envelope. I, Arthur Whitmore, being of sound mind. The formal language filled the room. The guests listened without moving. Then the lawyer reached the passage everyone had been waiting for. My daughter is the sole heir to Whitmore Holdings, with full and immediate executive authority. My husband rolled his eyes. Everyone already knew that. The lawyer raised one finger. There is an additional clause. He cleared his throat. If my daughter's spouse attempts to gain control of the company through manipulation or public pressure, that spouse will immediately forfeit all marital financial protections. My husband froze. What does that mean? The lawyer looked directly at my husband. The prenuptial agreement's protections are reversed entirely in the wronged party's favor, he said. You are no longer entitled to anything. The words settled over the room like a final verdict. My husband stared. That's not legally enforceable. Any spouse who attempts to manipulate the company or the inheritor during succession will be removed from all financial privileges connected to the marriage, including every provision under the existing prenuptial agreement. My husband laughed, a short, nervous sound. This is completely absurd. One of the partners spoke immediately. You walked into this funeral and publicly declared your intention to claim the company, in front of every witness in this room. Another nodded. You announced it before the will was even opened. That is precisely what the clause describes. The woman beside my husband whispered urgently. You told me the prenup protected you no matter what happened. My husband said nothing. The prenup had protected him under ordinary circumstances. He had never imagined a clause built for this exact scenario, nor that his father-in-law had seen him clearly from the very beginning. Since the DNA results confirmed no biological connection to the child, any inheritance claim through the boy was equally void. The lawyer closed the document with quiet finality. The clause is now active, triggered by your own actions, before your own witnesses. My husband's breathing grew heavier. You'll need a court order to enforce this. The document is filed, the witnesses are present. The process begins today. The woman looked terrified. So everything you promised me was wrong? My husband didn't answer. The chapel felt entirely different now. Earlier, every whisper had been aimed at me, curious, pitying, uncomfortable. Now every pair of eyes was fixed on my husband, and the quality of those stares had shifted into something harder and colder. He stood frozen in the center aisle, as though he still believed the moment might somehow reverse itself. The woman beside him finally turned and faced him fully. You lied to me, she said. Her voice was quiet and flat. My husband rubbed a hand across his face. Not now. You told me this was already arranged, that we would walk in together and walk out with everything settled. Her voice rose slightly. You told me I had nothing to worry about. Several guests turned to look at her. The shame on her face was complete. The man near the aisle watched quietly. Then he spoke. You should go, he said simply. My husband looked furious. This isn't finished. One of the partners stepped forward. It is for today. The lawyer nodded. The company's financial accounts will be frozen pending investigation. The board meets tomorrow morning at 9. The bylaws allow it. You gave us the grounds. The woman took the boy's hand firmly. We're leaving, she said quietly. My husband turned on her. You are not going anywhere. But she looked at him the way you look at someone you've finally stopped recognizing. I didn't know what you were, she said. She pulled the boy toward the doors. They opened. They closed. He stood completely alone in the aisle. The silence stretched through the chapel. My husband looked around slowly. Every face he had once read as an ally now wore the same expression: disappointment, suspicion, and quiet disgust. My father's oldest partner finally spoke. I trusted you, he said. Nothing more. My husband didn't respond. Another partner added quietly, we all did. My husband swallowed. You're all overreacting. But the words sounded hollow even to him. The lawyer closed his briefcase with a soft final click. The board meeting begins tomorrow at 9. All relevant documentation will be presented and examined fully. My husband's eyes narrowed. And if I choose not to attend? The partner answered simply, then every decision will be made without you. My husband turned toward me suddenly. You're allowing all of this? I met his eyes steadily. You chose this moment, I said. My voice didn't waver. You chose my father's funeral. You chose these people as your witnesses. You chose to make everything public. Every single thing that has happened since you walked through those doors is the direct result of what you intended to do. He looked away. The man near the aisle stepped quietly to my side, not dramatically, just deliberately. My husband glared at him. You think you've won something here? The man shook his head. This was never a competition. My husband scoffed. Then what was it? The man looked toward my father's coffin. A promise, he said. What promise? My husband asked. The one I made to her father. The room grew very still. My husband looked hollowed out now. The anger had burned away and left something rawer underneath. He turned toward the lawyer one last time. You can't strip everything from me overnight. That requires months of proceedings. The lawyer replied calmly. The company accounts connected to Whitmore Holdings will be frozen effective today, pending investigation. Your personal accounts are a separate matter for the courts, but your access to this company ends now. My husband shook his head. This will unravel within a week. But the partners had already turned to each other, discussing tomorrow's logistics. They were finished with him. The man beside me stepped forward. "You should go," he said. My husband looked up sharply. "Or what?" "Or the staff near the door will escort you out." Several guests glanced toward the entrance. The two men in dark jackets I had noticed at the opening of the service stood quietly on either side of the doors. My husband stared at them. "You arrange security at a funeral." The man nodded. 2 days ago, your wife found draft statements about the company and notes about the will reading schedule among your papers. She didn't know who to call. Her father had given me her direct number 3 months before he passed. He told me that if she ever reached out in fear, I should be ready. She called me that evening. I was here before the service began. My husband's jaw tightened. He looked around the room one final time. No one met his gaze. He turned, walked to the doors, and stepped through. They closed behind him. For several seconds, no one moved or spoke. Then the tension began to dissolve, slowly like ice at the edge of a thaw. Guests shifted. Someone near the back wept softly, and I understood they were crying for my father, for the weight of everything he had carried alone in his final months. My father's partners came to me one by one. "We are deeply sorry you had to endure this today," the first said gently. I nodded. Exhaustion settled into my bones, heavy and total, but beneath it, something else had taken root, something I hadn't expected to feel standing beside my father's coffin. Relief. The lawyer approached quietly. "Your father prepared all of this with extraordinary care," he said. I looked toward the coffin. "Yes," I whispered. "He always did." The man beside me said nothing. He simply waited. In that patient way of his, I had once found comforting and now recognized as something far deeper. I turned toward him. "You knew most of what was going to happen today," I said. He nodded. "Most of it." "Why didn't you warn me?" "Your father believed that if you knew in advance, you might act too soon. He wanted the truth to reveal itself fully, in front of everyone who needed to witness it." He paused. He said pressure was the truest test of character. I exhaled slowly. It was exactly the kind of thinking my father would do. "I'm sorry it had to happen this way," the man said softly. I shook my head. He chose every part of it, and he chose the ending. The guests returned slowly to their seats. The funeral service resumed, quietly, as though the room needed a moment to settle before it could hold anything tender again. The priest spoke with the same gentle steadiness he had brought to the beginning, offering only the words intended for this day. He spoke about my father's life, about the company built from almost nothing, about the values my father had never compromised, even when compromise would have been easier. Integrity, responsibility, protection. Each word landed differently now than it would have an hour ago. I had watched every one of those values play out in real time, set in motion by a man who had known he was dying and spent his remaining strength making sure I would be all right. My father had protected more than a company. He had protected me. When the final prayer ended, guests filed out slowly. Many stopped to take my hand. Some said nothing, just pressed their fingers around mine and moved on. The man beside me stayed close throughout, quiet and steady. When the room had nearly emptied, I turned toward him. "You kept your promise?" I said softly. He shrugged, the way people do when they want to minimize something that cost them far more than they will ever admit. "I tried to," he said. "Why did you agree?" I asked. "After everything. After all those years, why?" He met my eyes without hesitation, "To make sure you never had to stand alone." My chest tightened. For the first time all day, the tears finally came. The church was almost empty now. A few staff members moved quietly near the doors. The flowers stood still in the late afternoon light. My father's coffin rested at the front of the chapel, patient, unchanging, present. I stood beside it one last moment. "You planned everything," I whispered. The man stood close enough to be present and careful enough to give me space. I thought about the invisible work my father had done in those final months. The investigation commissioned in secret. The documents filed with the courts. the will updated and the clauses carefully inserted, the letter carried by trusted hands, and the call made 3 months before he died, reaching back across 8 years to ask a man he had never stopped trusting to make one final promise. After a long moment, I turned toward him. "I thought you must have hated me," I said, "after the way things ended." He shook his head. "I never hated you. Not once." "Then why did you disappear?" "Your father asked me to give you space. To let you build your own life, without wondering if I was still somewhere in the background." He paused. "I think he was also watching your husband, giving him enough time to show exactly who he was. And when he finally knew? He called me. He said he was afraid. He asked me to be ready." I looked around the quiet chapel. My father's legacy was intact. The company he had built was safe, and for the first time all day, the future felt like the beginning of something entirely new. My father spent the last months of his life making sure the truth would protect the people he loved. If you enjoy stories about betrayal, justice, and the moment everything finally comes to light, subscribe to the channel. I share stories like this every day. I'm curious. If someone tried to humiliate you like this at your own parents' funeral, what would you have done in my place?